morning. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here with us today. The ARC of California is thrilled to offer Caring Futures, a proven resource program dedicated to supporting caregivers and family members of adults with disabilities. Understanding the unique challenges faced by family caregivers as they age, Caring Futures offers critical planning assistance, resources, and a supportive community. Caring Conversations is just one part of Caring Futures program here at the ARC of California. We will share more about our other offerings by Caring Futures at the end of today's conversation, so please stay tuned. As you see, we have ASL interpretation for our discussion today. You can turn on closed captioning by clicking the button in the bar below. At the end of today's conversation, there will be a question and answer session. At that time, we'll invite you to raise your hand or type your question in the Q&A to ask our guests directly. Hello, everyone. My name is Felisa Strickland. I am a proud sole parent caregiver for my daughter, Lily. Lily is 23 years old. She has a diagnosis of cerebral palsy, autism, epilepsy, and IDD, and requires full-time care. We enjoy our life and live in Santa Barbara, California. Alongside full-time caregiver, I am a strong advocate for individuals with disabilities. I serve as a board member for the ARC of California, as well as Alpha Resource Center of Santa Barbara. I also participate on many committees and enjoy getting involved in fundraisers and advocacy projects in our community. As a Caring Futures instructor and parent educator, I am thrilled to be here for this important conversation with you and our special guest. Today's topic is affordable housing options for adults with disabilities, a guide for caregivers navigating housing options for their family members. Shella is the mom of Simone and has been involved with the Regional Centers and Department of Developmental Services since Simone was born with Down syndrome 33 years ago. Shella began her interest in affordable housing issues for people with intellectual, cognitive, and developmental disabilities when Simone was still in grade school. Founding the grassroots agency and becoming executive director of Chance Housing, the Coalition for Housing, Accessibility, Needs, Choices, and Equality, in 1999. Shella has over 25 years of experience delivering person-centered, affordable, and accessible housing access services to Santa Barbarans and others with ICDD, including seniors, families with minor children, adults, and persons with behavioral health and other needs. Shella has extremely targeted experience in HUD housing and other programs and all aspects of delivering housing access services. Since running Chance, Shella has become a tireless affordable housing advocate, is on the Developmental Services Task Advisory Committee, formerly the Olmsted Committee, and is now serving on Stakeholder Committee of California Health and Human Services Agency's Master Plan for Developmental Services. Shella is the president of California Housing Access Services and provides private consulting to individuals and entities interested in exploring or replicating the affordable housing service model she has been delivering to people and families for over 25 years. Without further ado, please welcome Shella.
Hi, Felisa. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Shella. How are you?
Good.
Thank you for being here with us today. I'm so excited about this conversation. I know we have a lot of people watching, and I know a lot of people are very interested in this topic. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Today's conversation is going to be a bit of conversation mixed with a slide presentation, which I'm really excited about. And I think it's going to be very helpful for this topic for our viewers. But before we get started, tell us a little bit about how your caregiving parenting experience for Simone led you to your now career and service to others, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, well, the truth is that Simone's story and our experience raising Simone is also the backstory to Chance's founding. And, you know, like many people on this webinar, watching this webinar, when Simone was born, we were very surprised. I was completely unfamiliar with the world of disabilities. And, you know, we spent a long time trying to, you know, struggling with the school system and the regional center, getting bounced back and forth in trying to, have Simone's needs met in both of those environments. We fought for inclusion every step, and Simone's IEP meetings were, they felt like a battle, but so did her IPP meetings with the regional center. When Simone was about 8, something occurred I never could have anticipated, but Simone's older brother, Nick, went off to college. And I had this epiphany, this question emerged in my head about what was going to happen with Simone. What was Simone's? I mean, Simone was only 8, right? She was in 2nd grade or something. And what was going to happen with her? What were her housing options? So I went to my regional center and I went to her service coordinator and asked the question, in my community, what do adults with Down syndrome, what is their living situation? And I was basically told that most people with Down syndrome live with family members, for their remaining lifespan, if possible. Some people go to our community group homes. Some people are in intermediate care facilities or nursing facilities. And of course, at that time, California had 5 open developmental centers, and that was an option for Simone as well. So I figured I had plenty of time. And I went viewing our local group homes, and I had been fighting for inclusion for Simone in the classroom, and I just didn't imagine that the group home setting was something that was, going to be right for Simone, for what I imagined. I don't know what I imagined, but I didn't imagine that. And I also went to our local ICF and skilled nursing facilities, and then I embarked on a process of going to the developmental centers. And it was at that point that I started working on statewide advocacy issues. And so we got together as a group of family members who were also interested in community-based, affordable, and accessible housing, interested in supported living services. But this was a housing model type, brand new at the time, 25 years ago, where the housing was separate than the services. So you needed to handle the housing separately. And then that's how Chance was formed. We formed a nonprofit agency. We got a small grant from the Department of Developmental Services, opened up shop, and then people walked in the door and had a housing need, and we just organically sort of figured out how to meet that need. And that is the founding of Chance.
That's amazing. What an amazing story. And isn't it amazing how our kids lead us on these paths, right? I mean, that's so wonderful. So you're going to share a lot of great information today. I know that. And I'm wondering, as a parent to an adult child with a disability with various support needs, do you have a short answer for getting started on the housing process? And what sorts of things should be considered to know where to start to best fit the individual's needs?
Well, everyone participating in this webinar, watching this webinar because the issue of permanent, affordable, and accessible housing has entered their brain. So they recognize that they have a housing need. And my first recommendation is that for anyone who has a housing need, even if you haven't really distilled it down to exactly what it is, you need to make sure that your IPP or your loved one's IPP reflects that you have a housing need or housing question, right? If it's not in the IPP, then there is no accountability around that need in your family. The state of California is embarking on a process of updating the IPP format. The thought and hope is that there is some element of the new IPP format that asks the question about housing so it can be documented. Some people have an urgent need. Some people have a question, a longer term need. Kids are young. Adults are living with aging caregivers. There's a lot of room in between those two things that need to be included in the IPP with regard to housing. The second thing is to find out whether your local housing, your local regional center has a vendor housing access services entity. Our agency is a vendor agency with my regional center, and it's not brand new, but it's not something that's been focused on by the department throughout the state of California. And it's only with parent pressure and questions coming in, asking the board of directors of your local regional center to focus on establishing housing access services for people. Is it going to get implemented? I've been around for 25 years and it hasn't happened yet. So let's, get in there and make sure that it happens throughout the state. A lot of people are not thinking about supported living services, but looking for group homes and other kinds of licensed settings because they're not exactly sure how it works with supported living and independent living services and separate housing. So if you have that need, you would contact your regional center, ask them for a list of vendor, group homes, licensed group homes in the area, and begin your exploration that way. Let me see what else. If you do not have an estate plan, or if you haven't thought of it, do not delay any longer in addressing the housing need. The best time to have included housing in an IPP and come up with a plan for yourself and your family was 5 years ago. But the second best time is today.
Wonderful tips. I mean, I didn't even think about the first thing you said. That, that part is so important. And I didn't even think about that until you said it. Thank you for those. Those are definitely some really great places for people to start. So thank you for sharing that with us. This seems like a great place to go ahead and dive into your presentation.
Okay.
So let's get started. You take it away.
Okay. So I think that if we go to the first slide in the presentation.
Yes, I am doing that. Can the host please enable the participating screen share?
Thank you for your patience, everyone. This is our first time doing it this way, so bear with us.
Yeah, there's a lot of information to be delivered. I'm trying to cut to the chase, and sometimes having a visual when talking about numbers is really the best way to transfer that information. And all of you participating will have a handout of this presentation. So, use it, take a look at it, ask me any questions about it. And keep in mind that we have been talking about doing an ongoing series on affordable housing. So if that's something that you would like to see or participate in, do let Felisa know.
Okay, we should have it coming up here in just a minute. Yes, and Shella mentioned it. We will be adding this slide presentation to a follow-up email that'll be coming out to all of you that registered with a copy of this webinar as well as the slide presentation. So that's something to look forward to. And I think we have slide coming up right now. So there we go. Yay.
All right.
And we did it.
So for those of you that don't have affordable, person-centered housing access services in your area, I just want to give you a brief overview of what it looks like, what it has evolved into in my area and for my agency. And so since we've been around for a long time, we get referrals from a lot of different sources. Of course, we get a referral from the regional center when it comes up during someone's IPP that there's a housing need, either some future housing need is yet undefined or an acute situation where a family is facing, an eviction notice or some other kind of housing instability. They get referred to my agency. But we also get referrals from people that we have helped before, family members who heard about us through word of mouth in some way, people who are with independent or supported living agencies who don't know how to handle their housing need and come to us. So we help. We don't deliver residential services, but we work with people in all residential service agencies, independent, supported living, and in group homes, like when people want to leave and get their own place. When a person is referred, we get a referral packet that gives us just some basic information. The regional centers are not really trained in collecting pertinent housing related information. So there's just a basic form for them about the person and their need and that kind of a thing. And then we schedule an intake from that. And we call the individual, they come into the office, we do an intake, which is really like a guided discovery process where we collect not only information about the individual, but about the entire household. We really sort of wrap our heads around the data and we document that. And we also do a housing needs assessment. I want you to stick a pin in this item to discover a person's math, because the resources that they need is all determined by what they, a person-centered, I guess, vision for their housing, and what they have and what their math is. On the next page, we'll delve into what the math is. But with that information, we create a person-centered housing access plan or a roadmap. How do we get from where we are in that meeting to where we want to be, right? From A to Z. And then we provide the enhanced housing case management and help implement the housing plan and roadmap. And people need different things, or they need everything, right? We can help them apply for rent subsidies, get on local affordable housing wait lists, search for suitable rentals, or other housing units that a family or the individual might need. Because of the nature of the disabling condition being intellectual, cognitive, and developmental, often our individuals need assistance with the application process. We also provide security deposit loans, because if there's one thing that you need to know, it is that a person may not actually possess the amount of money that they need to pay a security deposit to get into housing, right? It would endanger their Social Security award benefit. So that is a huge gap in people accessing affordable housing, accessing units of any kind. We also, when people get a voucher, are in housing, we assist with the voucher, we assist with unit inspections, we assist with lease up and move out. And pretty much at all steps along the way, people will encounter exclusionary barriers and obstacles that need to be overcome, because all of these systems were put together in the state of California and at the federal level without our participation, because we were in institutional settings when all of these systems were established. And also we are, darn good at figuring out the reasonable accommodations within the system that need to happen so that people can access these resources that they're eligible for. And one of the main things that we do is problem resolution as well. Advocacy, protection, resolution, eviction notices, neighbor problems, landlord problems, maintenance problems, all that stuff. So it's a full range of things that people need when they are disadvantaged in living in the community in affordable and accessible housing. Okay, next slide, please. All right, the math. Why are affordable housing options so critical to persons and families with developmental disabilities? It's because of the math. The feds have pretty much determined that housing is considered affordable to a person or family when they spend about 30% of their monthly income on housing costs. So what this looks like for our folks who have a SSI, SSP award, And I've kept this very general for simplicity's sake, because there's a lot of different income schemes, including people on SSA and that kind of thing, but we're just gonna make it simple. The monthly SSI SSP income is $1,183. Line number B shows the affordability at 30%. So you do the math, multiply it by 0.30. And so for our folks, rent that's affordable is $355 a month. And there is no community within the state of California where a studio or one-bedroom apartment can be located and rented for $355 a month. I've included a table below with 2 columns that shows 3 different communities, Southern, Central, and Northern California, and the average 1-bedroom rent amount. So while people can only afford $355 if they live in LA, the average 1-bedroom is $2,544. In Santa Barbara, it's $2,842. And in Sacramento, it is $1,800. And this creates a huge gap that needs to be filled. Next slide, please. So in living in the community, you need to figure out a way to overcome the math. And in order to overcome the math, you need to calculate what your rent gap is. So you can see, I've created another table where we talk about the average monthly rent in each of the communities. We subtract out what the affordable rent is, $355, and we come up with a monthly rent gap. In Los Angeles, the monthly rent gap for someone with an SSI SSP award is $2,189. In Santa Barbara, it's $2,487, and in Sacramento, it's $1,445. When you multiply that by 12 months, you come up with an annual gap of between $17,000 and $30,000. And this calculation can work in any area. You can figure out what the rent gap is. So the gap needs to get paid, and the gap gets paid by a subsidy, and the gap is what needs to be dealt with. And there are a variety of different ways that individuals deal with that rent gap. And if we can go to the next slide. Okay, so again, we have got 4 columns, and this represents the things that I see that families and individuals do to overcome the rent gap. The first column is obtaining some kind of a rent subsidy. So how is it that you subsidize that gap? People can get a Section 8 voucher. It's considered to be a rare resource, but our agency has figured out a way, in partnership with our housing authorities, deep knowledge of the system, to be able to have advance notice of when releases are happening, get people prepared and in the pipeline to apply when the wait lists are open, get them into project-based rent subsidies. We have knowledge of where all the tax credit properties are, so getting people on those separate lists. And then, of course, we're keeping track of the emerging affordable housing subsidy options. And currently, I'll give you 2 examples here, CalAIM and BH Connect. And, Proposition 1 just passed in the state of California for people that have behavioral and or mental health needs, or co-occurring developmental disability, those kinds of things. But also there are other entities, which is why the intake is important to collect the family information, because it might be that the Veterans Administration or Behavioral Health, Department of Social Services has a program. Foster youth have a special way into that. Our homelessness resources and coordinated entry are a way as well for when people are at risk or actually homeless, which is something that is happening in a frightening way. In my community, in a period of 4 months, the homelessness, we were able to track through our coordinated entry system for people with developmental disabilities grew 2.5 times, right? 250% in 4 months. So another way, column number 2, the green column, that people deal with that rent gap is they try and lower the monthly rent, right? They try and they try and eliminate the gap by doing things like people living with aging caregivers for, you know, as long as absolute possible, and then moving into, you know, licensed care situations if the family hasn't done adequate planning. Families are building ADU structures, and some people who have more means can do things like purchase a condo for their loved one and rent it to them for $355, right? For something that's affordable. Siblings and family can pay out of pocket or use a trust or CalAble, or there's just different ways that that gap gets paid. And that's actually its own webinar. We're not going to get into that, but we could if we wanted to do a different webinar on those kinds of options. The third column, the blue column, talks about how people, and I see it often here, people will agree to live in licensed group residential settings because they really don't have any other option for housing. We see people, you know, agreeing to live in, you know, adult residential facilities, RCFEs, other kinds of situations, congregate care, you know, especially if something happens with a aging caregiver, they end up in these situations. We see regional centers using respite beds or crisis resources or complex needs residential programs because people, you know, they just can't find other units for when people are going to be homeless. And then also the last column, homelessness. This is, you know, unfortunately something that we see our agency is tracking, but it is our hope that with changes that are happening at the department, and that DDS and regional centers will start tracking homelessness, because it is something that is happening. Most frequently, we see people couch surfing, right? When people can't find housing, they stay with someone, then they stay with another person. They're doing all sorts of stuff. Families living and sleeping in their car, sleeping in rented storage units, renting offices and using that, going to the homeless shelter. People are street homeless. People can use or access motel voucher programs that might be available. And people are often moved away from their home community to where there might be a vacancy in some other community, in a group home, or with, you know, couch surfing with someone, that kind of a thing. So none of these are really being tracked, and they should be. We have an idea how that can happen. If we want to switch to go to the next slide. So there are alternatives and options. You know, if we know nothing else about families, and, you know, in California, they're endlessly creative. Most areas of California do not yet have established affordable housing expertise or housing access service vendor agencies that families can rely upon. And so some of the pathways that they are creating are things like intentional communities, intentional supported living, and independent living homes with roommates, you know, renting rooms where that is more affordable, something within their budget. Unfortunately, roommate situations, while everyone thinks that's such a good idea, it's my experience that they're only good for a very short period of time, and then they're not good because it's difficult to live in group people with you know, together and have them be compatible. It just doesn't really happen. But then you end up with someone in a situation that they can afford that's less than ideal, that can create more problems from a behavioral and psychological developmental standpoint. And also people are doing intentional communities, you know, mixed sort of like multifamily kinds of things. And so everyone is getting creative. I've included a couple of different links of things that people might be interested in taking a look at. But even in situations where you're creating intentional communities, or you're in independent or supported living homes, or you're on, you know, accessing housing developments where housing has been developed specifically for people with developmental disabilities, tax credit properties, they're still not affordable enough for our folks many times. And so there's a component of people still needing a rent subsidy of some kind. Next page. Next slide, please. Okay. So some alternatives, you know, we haven't talked about the necessity of estate planning, but it's really something that people need to address right away. It's a very weird thing, but families and aging caregivers who are still living with and providing care to their loved ones think or haven't really nailed down that when they're no longer in the home, that home should stay with the person who has a disability. I find that siblings often, you know, want to sell the home. And so while this person has a home and services can be brought in, the home gets, you know, is part of the family, the estate plan, and it gets liquidated. And so the person leaves their home. So planned giving is incredibly important. Establishing special needs trusts, if that is a possibility. And there's also legacy home programs, and the Lanterman Housing Alliance, if you're not familiar with them, they have something as well. And those are alternatives and options. And I just want to mention that these last two slides are very brief overviews. We could do a housing webinar on each one of these separately and more. There's more options that I haven't included. And so we're just scratching the surface with this. Then it comes to what is it that families need to expect from housing access services? With success in making sure that people have the housing access services in their community, that is something that is just emerging for you. What should your expectation be? Your expectation should be that there are two prongs to the services that the vendors provide to you. There's direct services, and there's also capacity building. So this slide will address direct services. Housing case management, right? Consulting on a very individual basis based on the fact situation surrounding the individual and their family, performing an intake, taking a look at the budget, discovering the math, noting any known issues or concerns that need to be addressed, because there are obstacles and barriers involved nowadays in the accessing community-based housing of all sorts for our folks. There may be behavioral considerations that need to happen. There may be, you know, our folks are really poor. There could be bad credit, right? The people that own and control housing in the community now are very picky about about tenancies, and they can pick and choose. So those relationships between the houser community and our folks need to be developed. And Okay, and so an agency needs to become completely familiar with the housing market it's serving. The family needs to be involved in developing a strategy, and the agency needs to be able to do housing search according to a variety of criteria. Next slide, please. The other direct services are, providing assistance with housing authority applications, unit rental applications, which is a whole different system and algorithm, consulting with generic resources to establish ways for people to come up with security deposits and other kinds of move-in costs. And you can see the list. There's a lot of stuff. I don't want to spend too much time on it because I do want to get to a Q&A. And then let's go ahead and move to the next page, which is capacity building. And the basic thing that needs to happen in every community with regard to capacity building is that you need to have a seat at the table, and your housing access agency needs to be able to participate in local affordable housing, public policy, acts and actions, the consolidated plan, the housing element, who are your housing authorities, perhaps joining the board of your local housing authority, local nonprofit developers, establishing a stable of landlords and cultivating the stable of landlords who are people that can be regularly relied upon to rent to families. And I want to take this moment to emphasize something very important, and that is this. In serving on the master plan for developmental services, it has become apparent to me in a way that it wasn't apparent before, that the community of people, especially our Hispanic, Latino families and individuals, face greater challenges in accessing community-based, affordable, accessible housing than other populations. It is there's a disparity in access. And so the ARC California has a arm, LARCA, I guess, La ARC de California. Joe runs that, and I really hope that the ARC of California focuses on making sure that any housing advocacy efforts really include that population, because there are distinct cultural, language, documentation issues, that lack of access to certain resources that exist that really affect people's ability to stay housed in the state of California, and that needs addressing. And I hope that there's some way that I can outreach more through ARC of California or LARCA to help that population and transmit my information and some additional tips and tricks and that kind of stuff to that community.
I'm sure we'll take you up on that, Shella.
Okay, next slide. All righty, so some of the next steps. Every community should have a vendor housing access service agency. The agency should develop expertise in delivering the direct services, as well as the capacity building. People on this call should probably contact their local regional center and community services or community development department and find out whether or not there is a housing access services vendor already. Family, and the one thing I left out, you need to make sure if you have a housing need that it is mentioned in your loved one's or your IPP. There doesn't have to be a deliverable attached to it at this point if the resource is not developed, but this is a plan that really speaks to all of the fundamental needs of the individual. And there is no more fundamental need than having a roof over your head. So if it is a concern, if it is a need, make sure that it's reflected in the IPP so that it can be tabulated and calculated by the department. They will know that how many people have a housing need, or if it's urgent, or if it's a little bit longer term. Okay, and I always, since Chance started as a grassroots organization, I think that families, advocates, and agencies need to come together to develop what their community needs as well. And that concludes my presentation for today.
Thank you so much, Shella. You gave us so much great information, and I know everybody's going to be excited to get their PDF slide presentation after the webinar so they can really dissect everything that you shared. Before we move on to questions, is there any last tips that you want to give them? I think the most important thing you said today was make sure it gets in your IPP. And I think that that's a wonderful thing for us to just sort of hang on to. I didn't even think of that, but it's such an important step. And even if you don't have an immediate need, it still needs to be in there. Otherwise, it won't get addressed and it'll just, yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It takes really no time at all to say, you know, I have a need for affordable, accessible housing for my remaining lifespan. I hope one day to have my own apartment. I want to receive supported living services. And while I'm not there yet, this is what I want. This is what I envision for my housing.
Wonderful. Well, before we move on to questions, I would like to tell everybody a little bit more about the classes offered through Caring Futures. The Future is Now, designing a support plan for you and your adult family member is a 6-week live online class series where caregivers develop a comprehensive future planning guide for the caregiver and their adult family member with a disability, all in a small and welcoming environment. Future is Now classes are Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and they're also offered in Spanish. Self-Care Matters, Wellbeing for the Caregiver, a 2-week live online class series where caregivers learn about practice tips, resources, and strategies to improve or sustain their well-being. Self-Care Matters classes are Mondays, and they're also offered in Spanish. Visit the Caring Futures website at caringfutures.org and join our mailing list to keep up to date on these offerings, to register for classes, and more. Also, if you want to continue this conversation, then I invite you to join our Caring Futures Facebook group. It's a private group only for family caregivers and is a safe place for us to share our triumphs and challenges. A link to the Facebook group will be posted in the chat right now. Thank you again for being here today, Shella. We're going to move into our Q&A. We're ready to begin the Q&A session. So to ask a question, type in your question in the Q&A feature and we will answer you directly or call your question to the attention of the group or our guest, and we'll answer you directly. You may also select the raise hand feature. On the bottom of your computer, and if you're on a phone or tablet, then you should see the 3 dots at the bottom for the more option, and that will get you to the Q&A and the raise hand feature. Once you raise your hand, then we will allow you to turn on your audio so you can ask your question directly to our guest. We will do our best to answer as many questions as possible. And if you would like to use the ASL interpreter to ask your question, please raise your hand and request video access in the Q&A. Okay, so I am sure we have questions, and let me see where we're at. So if we go into the Q&A, I see we have a couple of hands raised, so let's go ahead and take Richard's question.
Hello, everyone. This is Richard Gallo from Santa Cruz. Thank you for your presentation. It was wonderful and valid. I would like to say thanks for mentioning homelessness because it is happening with our intellectual disability community throughout the state. I'm a housing advocate. I had to help someone who was with epilepsy before the age of 18, and he was homeless at the time. And he went through the regional center. They automatically denied him, even though he had the documentation to meet the criteria of epilepsy before the age of 18. I had him to go back, request for a hearing, and that's when they turned around and made him eligible for regional center services. Then the individual complained that he did not want group homes. I said, you don't have to live in a group home. You have a choice where you want to live. Ask for supportive living. Tell them that's what you want. But you may end up in a group home temporarily and then eventually go into supportive living once a spot becomes available because there's lack of supportive living services in our community. So I was very glad to help him. With families and friends of individuals with homeless individuals need to reach out for advocacy organization. They need to reach out for Disability Rights California. They need to reach out to um, with developmental disabilities services area boards so that they can understand their rights, so they can understand that they have the right to appeal because they don't understand the process through the regional center to become eligible. And then secondly, what services is available because they're not always honest with families what's eligible. Same thing with the IEP process. Administrators are never honest with parents what services is available for their child. Secondly,
Yeah,
I helped an
I,
individual with CP who was a foster child, was living in a nursing home. She did not want to live in a nursing home. She was the only one that was there that was 37 years old at the time, and the rest were all seniors above 70. I felt bad for the girl. So I agreed to help her voluntarily, even though she was not in my service area, because of me being a person with disability and helping the intellectual disability community and their families. I ended up filing complaint with the area board and with the regional center because the regional center violated her rights by not giving her what she wanted or her request. They just let her live there. She ended up living supported living in San Mateo County with full-time caregivers. She got her independence back. Our intellectual disability communities and their families and friends needs to reach out. That's not okay. Nursing homes are not homes. You need to remind about the Olmsted case. And great presentation.
thank you
Thank you,
so much.
Richard.
Yeah, so Richard brings up two important things, but one of the most important things is that families need to recognize that regional center service coordinators are not experts in affordable and accessible housing. And so accessing those, it's its own separate silo that is very specialized, just in the same way that family members do not need to become experts themselves in this one thing to get the needs met. Case managers, service coordinators at regional centers can't really do that as well. The issue of knowing the resources and making relevant referrals, if those resources exist in the community, is something that needs to happen. But you know, it's definitely the reason that housing access services, person-centered housing access services, need to exist in all communities in California, because it shouldn't be left up to, you know, who knows who to access all of those resources that exist. And they have been built since the 1960s. Every community has all of these affordable housing resources and programs. You know, it's been 50, 60 years in the making. It's just a matter of accessing the resources that already exist.
Shella, we've got a couple more questions here. I mean, we've got many more questions here, but I'm going to jump into this one. How do we find out when housing lists to get on in our area? This person's in San Diego. I'm finding it takes hours to scour the internet and could become a full-time job because everything is a different agency on a different list. Any assistance in finding this information? Is there an aggregate because it seems each builder keeps its own?
Yes, well, you know, there is no aggregate, no comprehensive way that I know of to access all of those resources. Each is distinct. One of the efforts being implemented, hopefully, by the Master Plan for Developmental Services is to develop that resource to pull all of that stuff together. It's also a suggestion for the Disability and Community Living Advisory Committee, DACLAC, formerly the Olmsted Committee, to pull those resources together. So it is on the radar, and it's actually one of the things that can happen in this budget situation that is technical rather than establishing new programs to harmonize and bring that information together. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question here from Carol. How do you get an advance notice of Section 8 offerings?
Well, we have a relationship with our local housing authorities that's been 25 years in the making. And we don't get what the housing authority recognizes that for the population of people with developmental disabilities, sort of because of the nature of the disabling conditions, there's a more effort that goes in at the front line so that people can participate fairly and equally when the list opens. So, for example, and I will ask the parents and family members present on this webinar to think about this. For notification purposes, you probably use your email address for your loved one for a variety of different benefits and resources and that kind of thing. So our folks are not necessarily on the internet using their email, sufficiently squared away for completing online applications that can be complicated, where you need to bring in what is your household income, what is all your social security number, all of this stuff can get very complicated. So oftentimes our folks have advocacy organizations, advocates, parents, siblings, vendors, different people helping them with their affordable housing. And our housing authorities understand that it sort of takes a village to prep someone, to get their most recent social security statement so they can put their income accurately, because there's all sorts of algorithms that are working behind the scenes now that didn't happen back in the day when there was a paper application. You went and you took it to the counter and turned it in. Now these systems are integrated, and you have to be very careful about completing the information correctly. Otherwise it gets flagged or kicked out or not entered in correctly. And so it just brings a whole level of other stuff, like, do you have transient staff at a provider agency who's helping this person? It takes a lot of coordination. So when we know that something is going to be opening up, then we start reaching out, we start, working with our providers, we talk with the housing authority about what, they do regular updates to their online and paper application process. We need to know what those are. What are the pitfalls? What do you put in this thing? Staff people, direct care staff are not going to know that. Families are not necessarily going to know that. So we try and know that to help people apply. And it takes time.
Thank you, Shella. We've got so many questions in here. I'm trying to pick out the ones that I think we can answer generally for a lot of people. Here's one. Do you know of any communities or states that do a particularly good job providing affordable housing to this community?
Do I know any? Say that to me again. Any?
Do you know any? Oh, where I've lost the question. Do you know of any states that that do a particularly good job of offering affordable housing?
Well, any other states other than California, you mean?
Yes.
I think that California might do it the best. Other states don't actually have the Lanterman Act. So accessing, depending upon what state you're in, they may or may not have expanded Medicaid so that you can get residential services, right? They may or may not value going back to HUD to get a lot of different vouchers and subsidies. I know that California really is focusing on people having affordable and accessible housing, maximizing whatever resources exist, changing laws to remove exclusionary barriers in a way that I'm not familiar with in other states.
Here's one, and I think this addresses, many people have asked this question already. Does Chance work in other areas in California? And does the regional center fund your help? And then also, does the family need to pay the gap of housing rental, or does regional center pay this? So that's a couple of questions, but a lot of
Okay.
people in the Q&A have asked if you serve other areas. And then I think another question would be, how do people access the type of agency you are?
Okay, well, Chance has worked on a limited basis through self-determination in a couple of different areas in the state of California on a case-by-case basis. I am also the director of the California Housing Access Services. And so there's like the consultation that can be done if that is needed by a entity, locality, person, family, group, whatever, for how they can implement their own services. And the regional center does not generally pay the gap, but in certain instances, it can when we're talking about health and safety. But it's very complicated. And let me think. And was there something else? Did I miss something, or did I get all those aspects?
Well, I think there was a question about, sorry, I'm trying to find it again.
Oh, sorry about that.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I think you got the majority of it.
Okay.
The main thing was people wanted to know how to access.
Oh, well, what you need to do is, I know that there are not many housing access service vendors in the state of California, but the department, the Developmental Services Task Force, as well as the Master Plan for Developmental Services, recommendations to the Department of Developmental Services is to have regional centers do extensive RFPs throughout the state of California to start establishing those services. And unfortunately, it's just going to take time. I obviously am here to help in any way, shape, or form that I can, individuals and localities, to sort of get that up and running in the quickest and most efficient and affordable way possible.
Okay. Let's see here. Suppose we could handle the financial aspect, e.g. buy a condo, use a special needs trust, but how does that address the need for care when the person needs a lot of help, not just someone dropping by once or
Yep.
twice a day? So
Yeah.
that's what you were talking about at one point, like that's a separate need from the actual housing element.
Right. So
How does
with
someone handle that?
Yeah, with regard to supported living services, the housing piece of it is handled separate from the service piece. And so for people that have extensive care needs, I recommend that you, whoever's asking this question, contact their regional center and find out what provider agencies in their community, residential service providers, are providing the kinds of services that they need. If you have never had your loved one have an assessment, it's something that the regional center does, through their vendor community, have an assessment of a person's activities of daily living and where they need assistance to live, protect their health and safety while living in the community. If you can handle the housing piece, supported living services are supposed to be able to be provided of the type, the scope, the intensity, the duration, that a person needs for them to live like anyone else in the community. Sometimes it requires something like, being on the HCBA waiver, right? Which is Home and Community-Based Alternatives waiver, right? Which is the Medicaid waiver. Or also using IHSS in home supportive services if they're on Medi-Cal, right? And it's all person-centered, it's individual, but you need to have an idea of, you need to hook up with your provider community and see which agency in your area focuses mainly on behavioral, or mainly on medical, or just socialization, or if someone, a person only needs help, with their grocery shopping or opening their mail or whatever. It's all different.
Thank you, Shella. Several people have asked about credit scores, if credit scores are considered for the individual with disability.
Okay, my experience is this. It is an exclusionary barrier because landlords sort of get to pick, but there's two different things that need addressing. Number one is that there are people that have bad credit, right? There are people that have bad credit because of medical bills or medical costs that are not covered in their life in another way. And then there are people who in households where they just don't have any credit. Most of our folks are adults with developmental disabilities who get a voucher or some other way are trying to access community-based housing, don't have a credit score, but that cannot be used against them. And this is where you need an advocate who is going to be aware of the rights. If an individual is turned down for housing, you can get a free credit report, or you can go onto one of the legitimate government free credit report sites to know beforehand, be informed before you start and see if there's any problem. The individual is probably not going to be doing that themselves. A family member, a sibling, an agency, a housing access services agency will be getting this information on their behalf and dealing with it. In our case, it's something that we identify in our intake process as a potential obstacle, challenge, barrier, whatever. So we know how to deal with it, and we can address it with one of our potential housers before it's an issue or problem, and it prevents them from housing.
Okay, thank you. Donna, I see you have a question. Did you like to come on live and ask your question?
Hi, this is Donna from Simi Valley.
Hi.
Hi, Donna.
You did kind of touch on it earlier when you talked about if someone does have a condo or a family has access to a condo for their loved one.
Yeah.
But what I'm concerned about is our healthcare crisis of being able to find 24-hour care and reliable care providers.
Yeah.
And what I
Yes.
found is our family did a lot of planning and sacrificing in order to provide this condo for our daughter to have housing. But what I'm finding is it's their support personnel who also need affordable housing.
Yes.
Because just because you built it and doesn't mean people are going to come.
That's exactly right. And, the ARC of California, along with a lot of other entities, are at the Capitol today. They're having a rally to not delay things like the rate increase that was supposed to happen. So there is actually a three-legged stool situation in play for affordable housing for people with developmental and other disabilities, right? You need the housing unit, right? You need the rent subsidy, and you need the adequate services piece. And we have just found ourselves in a situation where, thank goodness, because they deserve it, but fast food workers are making more per hour than our direct care staff. And the state is considering delaying the rate increase for direct support staff wages that was supposed to be implemented. So we are facing a crisis in care. It's something that needs to be dealt with. It needs to be dealt with hand in hand with affordable housing, because you can't have one without the other. You can't have people just living in an apartment with no support, right? I mean, maybe, minimal support. There's a whole spectrum. And so, that's an issue. And like I said, the Developmental Services Task Force and the Master Plan for Developmental Services is committed to tackling these issues in a just, equitable, diverse, and inclusionary way.
Thank you for that question, Donna. It sounds like when I'm listening to what you just said, Shella, it sounds like our best thing that we can do as parents, caregivers, family members is have that relationship start at the regional center, getting that in the IPP. And
Yeah.
also not only the housing piece of it, but we have to focus on the supported living piece of it too. And those two things together is how we're going to, and we've got to push for it because it doesn't come easy, right? Neither one of those things are easy for people to tackle right now because of all the things you just mentioned.
We have people with developmental disabilities have made, and their families have made great strides in the state of California. And I believe that with the Newsom administration and the people like Dr. Ghali, and Nancy Bargeman, and actually at all levels within Health and Human Services really are committed to taking a relook at the issues and the core issues and fundamental needs that people have. Unfortunately, up until now, right, 140 years between the first law passing in 1885 until today, that we're looking at community-based affordable and accessible housing. It's past time, but there's a commitment, and families can be involved at the ground floor of this new movement.
Well, I was going to say, and that's the other thing we can do is get involved in our local community to figure out how to best get our needs met.
Yep.
We're going to take one more question because we are getting close to our ending time. And let's see, I don't see another raised hand. So let's see what we've got in here.
Looks like a couple of people raised hands.
Yeah.
You said that.
All of a sudden, yeah. All of a sudden we have raised hands. I don't have a name, but there's an iPad with their hand raised. So if you want to ask your question. Are you there?
Yeah, this is Elizabeth.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Yeah, my question is, first of all, thank you so much. All those slides had all my frustrations from the last year and a half. Thank you. Okay, I was told by the SLS people that I couldn't use my daughter's special needs trust as a partial payment for her rent. And so supplement so that I could use that she had to be the full payee for her rent, which of course she can't be because she doesn't get enough money. Is that in there? And that her name had absolutely be on the, anyway.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Talk to me.
Okay, so the deal is that supported living people are not experts.
Yeah, right.
My recommendation would be that you need to speak with a entity or person who is an expert in that you can explain your personal fact situation to help you figure out how to pay the rent and how to use your special needs trust. I would suspect that it employs something like using an ABLE account, as a intermediary between the special needs trust and the housing payment, because that's a qualified expense. Housing expenses are a qualified
right, exactly.
Right. Okay. But in the interim, do you know whether or not you have well, first of all, have you put your loved one's housing need in their IPP?
No, I think that, well, we're having this fight between the ALTA, who says it's the SLS's problem, and the SLS who says it's ALTA's problem, and both of which say you do it.
So Elizabeth, let me just interrupt you here because ALTA has an amazing community development person who is all about community-based affordable and accessible housing. His name is John Decker. I think that you should contact him and let him know that you have a housing need, because
Okay,
he's the person that I know there, and your executive director also. I mean, he's completely amazing. He's among the most creative people in the state of California in terms of creatively, getting more units, getting more vouchers, making more connections with the housing authority, and that kind of thing. And I'll just finish it with one thing, and that's this. If you have a local, actually, let me see, Alta, STEP agency, STEP, STEP agency
okay,
is a vendor housing access entity in the Alta California Regional Center catchment area.
all right.
Okay, STEP, STEP.
So is that similar to what you do, right?
Exactly. I mean,
Okay.
they're actually the only other agency I know of that approaches what I do. They're recent, but they have a crack team of people that can help figure out
Oh,
all of
cool.
this stuff.
Thank
All right,
you so
Elizabeth,
much.
you're welcome.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay, everybody, we're going to have to wrap it up, and I'm terribly sorry to have to do that. I know we have so many questions, but I do know this. We plan to we want to send out a survey that you'll get tomorrow, hopefully tomorrow or within the next few days, to address some of your specific housing needs. And so look for that survey. It will survey the types of things you want to learn more about, and we're hoping to be able to provide some sort of workshop on some of those things. We're very, very appreciative of everyone who showed up today for this webinar. I know it was a lot of information, and I'm sorry that we weren't able to get to everyone's questions, but I thank you all for being here. I would like to say, especially to Shella, that I'm grateful for you taking the time to do this today. In addition to her work as executive director with Chance Housing, Shella provides consulting and technical assistance to people, entities, and localities seeking to explore housing access services in their own area. She can be reached at shella@chancehousing.org. And that will also be provided in the email that you'll receive after this presentation. Thank you again for your questions and for joining us today on this caring conversation. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.